As we segue here, Steve, and I'll mention Steve Dace joins us from the Michigan podcast. It's only been running for a few weeks, but it is on fire, and he's doing a fantastic job talking Michigan football and really college football across the board. So he joins me here on Mark Rogers TV as often as I can get him. Jim Harbaugh entering his third season, and with his track record and with who he's typically compared to, Steve, at the collegiate level right now, i.e. Urban Meyer and Nick Saban, who won national championships in their third year with their current schools. Your thoughts about whether that's going to be a standard that he's going to have to hit to maintain his elite status?
Yes and no. I think when you look at Nick Saban, he came to Alabama in 2007. The dominant program in the sport at that time was Pete Carroll's USC. But you'll also recall that's the year that USC, I think, was a 700-point favorite against Stanford in Jim Harbaugh's first year there, and they lost. And so the NCAA was kind of knocking on their door. Pete Carroll was looking for the trap door to get out of town. That was sort of the, we were on the downward slide of the USC dominant era under Pete Carroll when Saban came in. And so there wasn't another program that was in line to take that spot. And so his timing there was fortuitous. And the SEC had not yet established itself, as it would go on to do later on, a couple of years later, when it won like 8 national championships in a row. It had not yet established itself as the clear dominant conference in college football. So there was an opening there that Jim Harbaugh does not have, because he's got to deal with Nick Saban and Urban Meyer at their apex, at their zenith simultaneously. And that's not even counting Jimbo Fisher, who he ran into in the Orange Bowl last year, and now the emergence of Dabo Swinney at Clemson. And then you look at when Urban Meyer came into the Big Ten. The Big Ten was really in the throes of probably its weakest moment as a conference, at least in modern history, in terms of its perception. And he radically altered that. He walked into a league where the only guy that could really step to him and compete with him on the field was Mark D'Antonio, and beat him a couple of times. But in terms of persona and cachet, it just doesn't come close. I mean, in terms of Mark D'Antonio and Urban Meyer, and now you're seeing, frankly, Mark D'Antonio's program is imploding at Michigan State right before our eyes. So both of those guys, from a timing perspective, had advantages. Not only do they have their own individual greatness, which I don't want to diminish or offend whatsoever. They have earned the future busts that they'll have down there in Atlanta at the College Football Hall of Fame. But the timing was right for them to forge that dominance. In Harbaugh's case, he's now got to compete with those guys, with Saban recruiting and headlines in the offseason, and then during the year with Urban Meyer in his own division. And it's not even when Bo had Woody Hayes. Woody Hayes was towards the downhill slide of his career. It was probably accelerated, of course, by the incident in the Gator Bowl in '78, but it wasn't like the 10-year war was going to be a 15 or 20-year war. I mean, Woody Hayes already had one hell of a run at Ohio State, and he was closer to the end than he was to his prime when Bo established the Michigan program. Harbaugh is now up against a fully armed and operational battle station, to use a Death Star reference, in Columbus, Ohio. And it's not going anywhere as long as Urban Meyer decides he wants to sit there and keep his pedal to the metal, or doesn't get an itch to go to the NFL or retire again himself. So I think timing-wise, he has disadvantages that Nick Saban and Urban Meyer did not have. And so I think even if he realizes all of our dreams and desires as a Michigan fan, I think the chances of him being able to eclipse or equate a run of dominance like them probably isn't high, because I don't see those guys going anywhere, especially Saban, who I think will coach till he's dead. Now, do I think he's an elite great coach? Absolutely, especially if you consider his NFL resume. If you look at all time in the NFL, guys that have coached at least 4 years, he has a top 5 all-time winning percentage in the National Football League. And then you throw in what he did in college football. We forget how bad Stanford was. When Jim went to Stanford, them and Baylor had the longest concurrent streak without a bowl game in college football. He turned them into a national power. And not just, well, we can go 8-3 one year and go to the Rose Bowl with Tyrone Willingham and the Pac-10 sucks. I mean, they were a national power, the likes of which they had not been since Don Bunch, Jim Plunkett. These were years before I was even born, all right? And then you see what his successor has been able to do in terms of even taking that program beyond what Jim had originally built in the foundation that he laid. So I think when you look at his overall record, there's no question he's an elite coach. That's why I think there's no question he will eventually reach the mountaintop at Michigan. What I do question is, given the fact that you have Saban and Meyer still in the primes of their careers, that unless they voluntarily step aside, college football is a zero-sum game, Mark. Only one team can win this thing every single year. And when you've got two teams already with all-time great coaches, if it weren't for Nick Saban, there would be no question Urban Meyer is the best coach of his era. Nick Saban, it might be a question whether he's the best coach of any era. I mean, he might be up there with Stagg, Rockne, Bear. He's certainly in that conversation right now. And at 63, if he coaches another 5 or 10 years, he gets another national championship or two. He may end up eclipsing those guys. So I think Michigan being what USC was under Carroll, what Alabama is under Nick Saban now, what Florida State was under Bobby Bowden, 14 years in a row with top 4 finishes in the final AP poll. I think that's going to be difficult just because the competition is so much tougher for Jim. But do I think absolutely on a year-to-year basis he's going to have Michigan in the conversation? You bet I do.
Steve Deace joining us from the Michigan podcast. Steve, I was feverishly writing because you had me going in so many directions that I could take this in. So I've got 3 in particular. One, I want to make this conversation about Harbaugh and not about college football history, but I would take a bit of an argument with you up on the Bo Woody situation in the 70s. So Bo certainly sent Woody off into the sunset with 3 consecutive losses when Ohio State was still a very good program, but not an elite program. Sure, by name they were elite, but not on the field. They lost 3 consecutive bowl games. Of course, the Gator Bowl was the worst finish of.
They didn't score an offensive touchdown against us, Mark, the last 3 years of the 10-year war.
Yeah, I remember scores: 14-3, 14-6, 22-0. Yes.
22-0. Yep.
Yeah, in 76 in Columbus. So, yeah, but those Ohio State teams finished top 10, 12 in the nation. They weren't great vintage Ohio State teams. But just prior to that, Woody probably had his best run at Ohio State. And we're talking about a coach that was there in 1951. Mm-hmm. That won those games that as well as I did, knocked off Michigan teams when Archie Griffin was there that would have been playing for national titles if they hadn't had to play Ohio State, and those games were decided by that much, and one was a tie, of course. So I think Woody was just exiting his prime, not in terms of age, but in terms of what he accomplished at Ohio State. Of course, the last national title was in 68, and that was 1 year prior to Bo's emergence. The other thing is that Harbaugh is competing in a different era where the expectations are different. So Bo Schembechler is readily included as one of the great college football coaches in history, and he never won a national championship. Longevity plays into that. The conference, the winning of conference championships and the weight of that in 1975 versus in 2017 is completely different. I think it's unfortunate. Sure. And that's what Jim Harbaugh has to play against. So, we could only conjecture over the next 10 years and take a guess that if we knew Urban, Jim, and Nick are all going to be at their schools, and Jimbo for the next 8 to 10 years, how many national titles are those 4 guys going to have to share? And is anybody else going to be included in that list? And I'm sure somebody will break through, but there's only so many to go around, as you mentioned exactly. Near the end of your dissertation there. And then the other one is that Jim Harbaugh sometimes gets knocked for not winning the championship because we're locked in as Americans on the gold medal, not the silver, and you have to finish number 1. And the Buffalo Bills were a failure and all of that. Well, Jim Harbaugh put the San Francisco 49ers, first of all, we talked about this, I believe, the last time, that what he did in terms of a reclamation project in San Francisco was pretty remarkable, as he did in other stops in college. But he got the Niners not just to the Super Bowl, they had the ball in position to score the touchdown to win the Super Bowl. He can't throw it, he can't catch it, he can't block, he can only do so much. So to me, he built a team that was a Super Bowl caliber champion. there in San Francisco.
To me, I think look at the two stops he had before he came to Michigan. I think that tells you all you need to know, Mark. Start with Stanford. All right, so he leaves Stanford to go to the 49ers. Bob Bowlesby, the AD there, anoints David Shaw, one of his offensive coaches, to be the head coach, to continue the foundation that Jim laid, to embrace that foundation, to be the outlier program. And it was the Pac-10 at the time, to be the outlier program. Everybody else is running air raids and throw the ball over the yard. We're lining up with 17 tight ends and 22 sets and heavy packages. And, I mean, and try to be physical in the era of Oregon and Chip Kelly. And Bob Bowlesby embraced that, handed the reins to David Shaw. And you saw Shaw take the foundation Jim laid and even go into a different even area code than Jim was able to get it to. And then you contrast that with the 49ers, who did not embrace the vision and foundation that Jim laid, and instead decided, we don't want to do this at all. We don't want to be like this at all. We're going to do this our own way. And you've seen their entire franchise implode. Everybody in the front office has lost their jobs. They're on their second or third head coach since Jim left. Their entire franchise has imploded because they did not embrace Harbaugh's formula. They did not embrace the foundation he laid. Stanford did, and you've seen them be even better since he left. I think that's very telling to compare those two enterprises.
That's a great point. Definitely. Steve Deace joins us from the Michigan podcast. And Steve, if I got you on here and you could do nothing but talk Michigan football, that would be perfectly fine with me if you could just hammer away at the backup left guard position in the battle for that spot in August and ran me through the gamut. But it's great knowing that I can toss out anything across the map in college football, and you usually beat me to the punch in doing so. But it's a great discussion, no doubt.
I appreciate that. That's high praise considering the source. Thank you, man.
All right, Steve Deace. Thank you so much, Steve. We appreciate the time. Know you're running around doing all sorts of crazy things and have so much going on that I appreciate the time.
Anytime, Mark. God bless. Thank you.